My name's Ricky Patel, and welcome to our demo today on the SAS Essentials SKU. So, based on what you can see on the screen at the moment, this is very much the Basecamp portal where you can see things like the release notes, any knowledge base articles that could support you with using the platform, any demonstration videos of how to import applications, maybe adding certain components of the environment to this, such as Intune integrations, and then also any blogs that we may have created to support you within this space. So by simply clicking on the icon in the top left-hand corner, we can very much head into the first part of our journey, and that is to migrate applications from where they are today into maybe future states such as Intune. Applications can be added in a few different ways, and that could be by taking your applications in their pre-packaged state. It could be manually creating those applications from your files and command line strings. And the other method could be for you to import those applications from an existing config manager environment. So regardless of any of those scenarios playing out, and we'll maybe just click into this endpoint manager one for the meantime, is that we import the application into the platform, allowing us to create a record for the application. So we are able to do things like discovery, and that would include things like installing the application, analyzing to understand what changes on the operating system now that the application has been installed, and then being able to baseline the application by launching the application to understand what happens by not only installing the application, but by also launching the application, making sure there isn't any prerequisites missing, or if the end user is presented with any error messages. The last part of the journey is very much to make sure that the application is going to work on your intended operating system. And that could be that future build that you're using for Intune Autopilot. And we'll be very much taking that vanilla image and then testing out your applications on there and also playing into those scenarios such as single session and multi-session if you are looking at things like AVD. The idea behind this is for us to then be able to connect to your config manager instance and then be able to bulk import your applications into the platform. So just to kind of step through that process, what's happening as part of this is, like I mentioned, as part of the import, we're going to then carry out an anti-malware scan on the application, making sure it's safe before we start to work with it. We then go ahead and then install the application as part of that process. So we're able to provision a virtual machine within Azure. We then take the application and install it against the operating system and understand what changes are appearing on that device in order for us to gauge what components of the application we may want to test in our next stage. We capture everything in a console view in a video format, but much rather than me maybe watching this video through, we could also have the option of heading to the Outputs tab and then seeing if there's any error messages or any desktop shortcuts that are presented on the device once the application has been installed. Should I be interested in things like performance metrics, I'm then able to also measure those performance metrics against my Windows 10 vanilla image, and that could be the operating system that I'm using today. And after every use, we then go ahead and deprovision that task runner. So based on that information being discovered from what we've done, we're able to then come into the application and understand what's being captured. So things such as the information such as the icon, where the application is being stored within the Azure storage accounts, the installation and the uninstallation command line strings, the behavior in which the application needs to be installed in, and how you want Intune to behave by having those restart codes coming from those devices. We are also able to pull things like exit codes, and if the application is coming from Config Manager, we're also able to pull any dependencies, any dependies, and any of those detection rules that are being captured across. So as part of the application being installed, like I mentioned, there's lots of moving components as part of the application, but maybe it's just a certain part of the application we want to be able to launch. So in some scenarios, depending on what's been identified, we'll automatically have an executable for us to smoke test. In other scenarios where applications may not have a shortcut landed on the desktop, we'll then also be able to maybe switch those parameters on, allowing us to then test that component. So when it comes to smoke testing of applications, the idea for this is everything is happening autonomously in the background. We're then able to then install the application on that virtual machine. So again, we're spinning up a virtual machine, installing the application. If I had set any uninstallation parameters, we would then also capture those here, and then going ahead and deprovisioning that task runner. Again, like I mentioned, we were able to then capture it in a video form, in the outputs via screenshots, and then measure those performance metrics. At this stage, I could be happy with being able to simply export this application. So I can export the application as a download in an Intune Win format. I can use the Intune integration and directly export the application into Intune. Or if I am using something like WPM, I can then export it directly to our WPM repository. As part of the validation that we do here at Rimo, we understand that you may be using Windows 10 today. However, you want to make sure that the applications are going to work on a certain version of Windows 11. So by taking the application, we then automatically baseline test the application against your intended operating system. And this could be Windows 11 22H2. And what we're seeing here is that baseline test of a virtual machine being provisioned with Windows 11 22H2, the application being installed, and then again, if there was any uninstallation parameters, for the uninstallation to be captured, and then that VM to be deprovisioned. So at this stage, we've taken the application through our process. We've been able to test it out on our existing operating system, got the confidence that we're able to test this out against our Windows 11 build. I then can, like I mentioned, select a number of applications, either export those as an offline file or directly into Intune or into WPM. The next part of the journey very much comes from how do we keep these applications up to date? So using the Rimo patch catalog, you can simply come into here and then select a number of applications. It could be for the Adobe Acrobat application, we want to be able to export this application directly to Intune every time Adobe releases a newer version. So we're able to automatically import an application, discover, onboard, and validate, making sure it's successful to be exported into Intune. And that can be carried out by onboarding or subscribing to an application. And by subscribing, the next time Adobe releases an update, and that could be version 578, we'll automatically be tracking for that and we'll be able to push that application directly through our process and making that application available to be deployed from your Intune environment. This would mean that every time a new release comes out, they will automatically be exported into Intune, validated against your build, giving you the confidence that it's going to work successfully. So the next part of the journey really comes from then how do I get these applications deployed out to our devices within our environment? So on the right hand side here, you can see the Rimo3 extension. This can be installed from either the Chromium store or the Google Chrome web store. And by simply installing the extension and logging in using your Intune credentials, you are then able to carry out a multiple various tasks. And that could be the cleanup of assignments for your applications. It could be deploying applications. It could be doing phased deployments of applications. But what about if I wanted to gauge an understanding of a certain application within our environment? So by clicking on an application, I can then see here that I'm able to view package details of the current app. I can then have a look here, and that could be that we want to understand that did this application work successfully on our baseline Windows 10 22H2 build? Did it install and launch successfully on Windows 11? And if I am planning to use it for AVD, then what were the results for that too? So bringing in some of that information from our workspace environment, we're then able to pull information such as executables and shortcuts that could be part of the application, any services that were installed as part of that process, and maybe any existing deployments that we may have in place for the app, giving us the confidence that it's been verified by Rimo3 and the application has been tested against your operating system. If I wanted to then deploy or unassign an application, instead of going through the environment and picking maybe a single app, then removing the assignments, I may want to select 5 applications and clean up the assignments of those applications because a new version of those apps is due to be released. I can either say I want to immediately remove those assignments, I can pre-schedule to say on the 30th at 12:43, I would like the assignments to be removed from those 4 applications, allowing us to then maybe think about deploying out the newer versions of those applications shortly after, or maybe before, depending on how you want to get those applications to your end users. You can then come back into here and maybe into applications and then select your applications that you would like to deploy either today or in your future date. In a similar way to that cleanup activity, we can then go into new deployments, take those applications that we've selected, and not just assign it to a single group of individuals, but maybe I want it to be deployed to the retail groups, the engineering groups, and to IT, rather than having to go into the application and adding the assignments one by one. I can then come in, pick my 5 apps, pick the groups I want the apps to go to, and then select whether I want it to be in a required state, available, or uninstall. I can then go through and set some of these parameters within here, as well as installing it in the device's time zone. By clicking on save and then clicking on next, I can then quickly review my settings, allowing me to then deploy the application or applications in this scenario to our end users. And this is 6 apps to 4 groups of individuals by not clicking as many times as you would by going into the console manually, selecting the applications and assigning it out to those end users. So we then have the application list again, and this time we can have a look at the phased deployments of applications. So again, I'll pick a number of applications within here. I want to set a phased deployment, so then I get my application out to phase 1 immediately, and that phase 1 group may be the retail group in this scenario. I can then build out these phases. So then phase 1 will go to retail immediately. Phase 2 can be then created because I want to schedule these applications to be deployed on the 30th. And I want these applications to be deployed to a few different groups of individuals. And that could be HR, finance, sales. You can click on next, making sure again we're installing it in the device's time zone. And by simply clicking on next again and save, we can then start to map out our phase 1, our phase 2, giving us the confidence to go ahead and deploy. I can then track these deployments by either coming to this page, or I can head back into our home, over to the deployments list, and then I can track any previous deployments that we may have done to understand what the progress may have been for them. The last point of the journey very much comes into reporting when it comes to Intune. So by taking the data that's in Intune today and from Windows Update for Business, and also if you're interested in any of the NIST CVE components, by pulling that data together using our APIs, we're then able to consolidate that information together into a set of dashboards, which you can see on the screen at the moment. And we start to show things like the number of devices within the environment, how compliant are those devices, are devices missing security updates, are they on the latest version, the not latest, or missing multiple updates? Are we then going through to understand what is the distribution of operating systems in the environment and how many of the devices within there haven't synchronized back to us in the last 30 days? What is the distribution of different hardware manufacturers in the environment? And if I am looking to build my devices using Intune Autopilot, then how long are my builds taking today? And of those builds, how many of those succeeding versus failing? And from the devices that we're managing within the platform, how many of those are company-owned devices versus person-owned devices? With a big direction being towards Windows updates, compliance of devices, making sure all devices are on the same version. I can start to see here that for Windows 11 24H2, I have a number of different versions because maybe these versions are on different cumulative updates. I can then start to see here how many devices are either up to date or out of date. If I wanted to explore the update trends as to what's going on during our month cycle of Windows updates being released, when do we see Patch Tuesday? And when do we start to see influxes of deployments going out or devices becoming more compliant? Can be very much seen within the deployment trends. If I wanted to see it in more of a table view, I can then go ahead and see all the devices that are managed within my demo environment, the version and name of the operating system that they're on, as well as the release date of their latest update, if the device is up to date or not, when it was last synchronized into Intune, and was it online long enough for it to synchronize into Windows Update for Business. If I wanted to then explore a certain device, I can click on the paperclip icon over here on the right hand side and then drill down into this device. So I can start to see then the make, the models, the serial number, information regarding the operating system and the enrollment information pulling from Windows Update for Business, as well as components about how is that device behaving from a hardware perspective or from a device performance side of things, and what is the hardware info for that physical device, and what applications exist on that device as well, and not capturing what's just been deployed to the device, but also what could have been installed on the device manually. We can then go into things like feature update insights, where we can start to understand what is the impact of introducing Windows 11 24H2 to our environment. Are all devices going to be able to upgrade successfully? Is there going to be issues in regards to diagnostic data that is being pulled and devices not being able to upgrade for whatever reason? We can then come back into these dashboards and understand how many devices are within support, nearing support, if devices are going to encounter things like hardware related issues, or has there been any active deployments of new operating systems within the environment, and how successful have they been? We can then head into things like environment compliance to understand where we are today from active devices that may have been BitLocker encrypted, and also components in regards to secure boot, and not forgetting things like compliance policies. When it comes to compliance policies, we would pull the compliance policies from your environment and give you an understanding here as to which component of the policy your devices are not compliant against. So again, we can see here that there's a number of devices that are not compliant. We can then drill down further into this information to have a look at what devices are either in compliant state or not. And then we can come back to understand what devices may need further remediation. When it comes to the NIST application vulnerabilities, this is very much pulling the data together from the NIST database and the data that's within your Azure tenant and Intune, and being able to compare that data together to understand which devices within your environment you may have certain application vulnerabilities against, and what applications or updated versions of applications need to be released to your end users, being able to reduce the amount of impact the organization could have from exposed CVEs. The last few that I'll touch on very quickly is very much targeted towards Cyber Essentials and the auditors that you may have come into the environment. This will give you a high level understanding as to where you stand today and the information that is being requested from you, rather than being able to having to run multiple reports within Intune to extract that same data. We then head into application management, where we start to pull all different types of applications, the application deployments that have been done, any applications that have either been created recently or edited. How many versions of the same application do you have in the environment? Is that something that we want to focus on to consolidate? And from the applications that are being deployed to the environment, how many of those are failing to install? And what is the error codes and potential error state details to support with remediation of those application deployments? When it comes into things like asset insights, the idea behind this is to be able to show you the operating systems that are at play within the environment, how many devices have been active, and from those various hardware manufacturers, what is the free disk space for them, And from the device that I've connected into the environment, how long have they been active for? Was that enough time for those devices to synchronize in? And if you are using Dell or Lenovo devices, we also then provide you with extended drill downs to be able to see a lot more about where you stand today from your warranty side of things. The last one that I'll show today will be the autopilot insights, and this is very much to support existing deployments or enrollments that you're having of devices rather than going into the Intune portal. You're very much able to see here your autopilot profile and configurations that you may have within your enrollment status page. But thank you very much for today's session.